We're very happy to have today Michael Collins, the town engineer for Southold. Who's been with us for 12 years and talk today about what the town is doing with regard to stormwater mitigation, specifically the outfalls into the estuaries in the bay all around town. Michael's been with us for 12 years in Southold and has a career that's 24 years with municipal engineering. And with that, Michael, you're on.
Thank you all for coming. A few things to start. Unfortunately, the projector really doesn't have enough resolution to do what I wanted to do today, was to, in addition to give you some information, run you through some interactive maps that the town has created that can help explain the issues. So at the end, I'll let you know where those resources are. So it's really just going to be text and information. I'm going to try and keep the jargon to a minimum. If you don't understand something, stop me and I'll go back and explain it. Otherwise, I'm going to leave the majority of today is going to be left for questions and answers. So I'm just going to run through basic information on what we're doing and then allow you guys to ask me whatever you want. I find that that's usually a lot more informative and helpful. So we're here to talk about stormwater mitigation, a few basics. What is stormwater? If you don't know, it's water that runs off the ground after it rains or snows instead of soaking into the ground. It can include water from rooftops, paved areas, lawns, driveways, and parking lots. Stormwater can be a major source of pollution in all of our water bodies as it picks up pollutants on the roads and on the lawns and then delivers them into the bays via outfalls. So the important thing is mitigation versus regulation. Stormwater mitigation is the way that we reduce the negative effects of stormwater to the environment. We do that primarily by eliminating outfalls. It also can be through infiltration practices, diverting some or all of that water into leaching basins or recharge basins so that it doesn't reach the bay. Yes?
Can you just say what an outfall is?
Yes, an outfall, sorry, I think that's on a later slide. I should have put it first. What is an outfall? So an outfall is a concentrated source of stormwater flow to a body of water. It's typically what you think of as a pipe going into the lake or a pipe into the bay. It can also be a paved ditch, an unpaved ditch or swale, anything that tends to concentrate stormwater from a large area into a small area and then discharge it into that body of water. And that's what's called a point source of pollution, because it comes from an area but it goes to a single point. We also have what's called non-point source, which is, if you can imagine a lake, all the lakefront properties that surround that, everything that's coming off of those properties indirectly, not through a pipe or a ditch, that's known as non-point source stormwater pollution. That's an important distinction because when it comes to the regulatory program, point source stormwater is regulated. Non-point source is not. And that's critical because most of the stormwater runoff that goes into our water bodies is both non-point source and unregulated. So what we're going to talk about today is the portion of it that we can do something about as a municipality. So those practices again through outfall elimination, infiltration practices, and natural buffers. Don't let the water spill directly over a roadside. Leave a planted strip of grass or other vegetation that will help filter it before it goes into the water body. Stormwater regulations are a set of rules that aim to control stormwater runoff and improve water quality. There are federal regulations, and that's where the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES, that is the set of rules that all other rules stem from. So that's an EPA regulation that's set because of Clean Water Act requirements. That then goes down to the state level where the state took state level control of that program. They have to do a program that is at least equivalent to the federal. So in New York State, the DEC has those sets of regulations and have control over stormwater regulation at the state level. And that's very similar. It's SPEDI's State Pollution Discharge Elimination System. And then we have local laws. So we have 3 chapters of local laws that cover stormwater. 235 and 234 are chapters that are required by the state level regulation. They essentially control runoff from construction sites, both during and after construction, and it controls, it regulates runoff that goes through an outfall. We are required to pass those laws because the state has mandated it. They designated our community as regulated. We were required to pass those laws to meet those regulations. Chapter 236 predates both of those. That's the town stormwater code, which is designed to apply everywhere in the town to reduce runoff to both the roads and the bays. The idea there is to try and contain water on individual properties and developments so that it doesn't cause a problem for the municipality or the environment. Next slide. So this is the state level regulatory history for us under speedies. March 20th, 2009, we were designated as a municipality that must obtain coverage under the state general permit. And that was based on what are called total maximum daily load regulations. And what are those? That is a set of regulations that are very specific to bodies of water that are designated as impaired. And by impaired, it means you can't use them for the best intended use. Specifically for shellfishing. There were shellfishing restrictions on a number of our water bodies, and the EPA and the state worked on these TMDL regulations, which, put it very simply, is meant to be a pollution budget. You have a large amount of pollution that they measure is going in, you have to remove a certain amount, and it is assumed that if you meet that budget, that water body will be returned to its best use. So that's how we were dragged in, because there are multiple ways that you can be regulated under speedies. One of them is your town has TMDLs. The other is your town is designated as urbanized. So that happened as a result of the 2010 census, where they determined that the western portion of Southold town is urbanized. Now, that was a shock to everyone. When we dug into this, we found out that the Census Bureau, their definition of urban has diverged since the original regulation, the Clean Water Act, and the original federal regulations were written. Originally, those were written, it had to be an area that had a population of 50,000 people and a density of more than 1,000 people per square mile. It won't shock you to learn that Southold and Riverhead combined don't have that population, nor do we have that population density. There is a methodology change from over the course of decades, and I'm not making this up, it's called a hop, skip, and a jump, where literally they can hop from one small dense area to another, or skip or jump from one area to another and create linked corridors of areas. So in 2010, we got dragged in because they connected Riverhead's dense downtown area to Southold's Mattatuck Hamlet area through Peconic Bay Boulevard. Now, in the Census Bureau's mind, this is two dense areas. One is a city, one is a suburban area, and this is the commute. Now, that may work on a very large basis when you're talking about cities like New York City. This has unfortunately designated areas that are quite clearly rural as urban. And this is what happens when one federal agency just blindly uses another's data and doesn't change with the times. And as a result of the 2020 census, now the majority of the town is now considered as urbanized. From the western boundary of Laurel all the way over the causeway into Orient. So probably about 80-90% of the town now is considered urban. Some streets, it's ridiculous. Literally, the left side of the street is urban, the right side is rural. There's no sense of it. But there's also no fighting it, so we didn't bother. What we did fight was the TMDLs. We discovered early on, probably over a decade ago, that these were completely false. They had I couldn't find one thing right with them. It's a multi-hundred-page document. The only thing they got right was the average annual rainfall on Long Island. I agreed with that, but nothing else. There are just a few of the problems. The agency departments at the DEC don't talk to each other. So shellfish closures that were a result of marinas, which are called administrative closures and not based on water quality, were misidentified as water quality problems. You had data from certain areas, they don't test them at all. So in the absence of testing, the area is closed to shellfishing. In certain areas, they use the wrong data points. They use the wrong pathogens to model. Overestimated contributions from the town, overestimated the overall contributory area, the list goes on. And as a result of those flaws, we were able to get all the other towns together, provide the agency with data, and in 2018, they repealed those statewide. All the pathogen regs were on Long Island, but every single one of them was repealed. And I was told by EPA that that had never happened before in the history of Region 2 EPA. The only time they ever repealed a TMDL was the agency did it because they changed the standard for copper in some harbor. So this is the first time that municipalities have ever successfully gotten the agency to recognize that they made a mistake and reverse it. Next slide, please. So, as you can imagine, regulation alone, based on what I just described, yes.
Reversed it to what?
They eliminated it entirely. So there's no longer a TMDL set on any pathogen water body on Long Island. And they have claimed that they're going to go back and get it right. It's been 6 years. I've seen no evidence that they will. I will be long retired before they try this again. Because realistically, what we showed is it's not a problem that can be solved through this process. If, for instance, we showed that 99% of the water was non-point source and therefore couldn't be controlled, how am I supposed to make a 50% reduction, which is what their math showed, if I only control 1%? And so that's where this is all going. We're just eliminating the problem entirely rather than arguing about the magnitude of it. So regulatory requirements often focus on record keeping over results. One example, the new permit, which you just dropped in January, states all catch basins have to be monitored routinely, either once or twice a year for trash and other debris. But there's a caveat. If your sump depth, which is defined as the bottom of the pipe to the bottom of the catch basin, is less than 2 feet, you don't have to clean it. Well, the highway standard is an 18-inch pipe. The actual structure is 48 inches deep, and the knockout that the pipe connects to is in the middle. You don't really have to do the math to figure out you are never going to get 2 feet of sump depth. So I'm now required to go and monitor all these things annually, but never clean them. So I'm not saying that we don't clean them, I'm saying that the regulation is not going to solve that problem. And then regulations are all often based on flawed data models and assumptions. I just went through all of that with the TMDLs. I put a small example here. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but this is one of the TMDLs was set on West Harbor and on Fisher's Island. And to show you how they, just as simply as being internally inconsistent, it starts, West Harbor and Pirates Cove are located on Fisher's Island. Pirates Cove is the innermost section of West Harbor. Both estuaries had very small watersheds and no fecal coliform exceedances, which means there are no water quality issues that result in shellfish enclosures. You go right to the last line. These two stations will be used to determine TMDLs for their specific areas with offshore concentrations applied from blah, blah, blah. In one paragraph, they contradicted themselves. And it took a decade to reverse this. So what are we doing about this? Eliminate the problem, yes.
Shouldn't the issue not simply be fecal matter, and what about chemical matter? You know, runoffs from, oil, this and that. In other words, is that all we look at to say that we can do shell fishing?
That is correct.
Well,
Shellfishing closures
Right.
are based on two factors. Administrative closures, which when you have a number of a certain density of boats in an area, they assume that someone is going to do the wrong thing and dump their head into the water. And that's what's called a transient event that sampling won't capture. So for whatever period of time that marina is open, that area will be closed administratively. And then when it comes to water quality closures, there is one factor and one factor only that they measure. Actually, let me rephrase that. Routinely measure is fecal coliforms, that's a statistical average. They also do other types of like paralytic shellfish poisoning. That's something else they measure for. Chemicals are not. They're not part of the shellfishing protocol at all.
So we're safe from getting sick and dying acutely, but not long term.
Right.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Yeah, sure.
It's an absence of data. They're not routinely sampling the shellfish meat itself
Right.
to determine. Maybe someone else is. That could be at the FDA level. I don't know. But when it comes to regulatory shellfish closures controlled by DEC, their annual program is based on the fecal coliform standard and everything else. And they also, like I said, they measure for toxins as well. But chemicals is not part of that analytical setup.
Thanks.
So what are we doing? Well, our basic program is regulated by this Speedies General Permit with GP 024001, which just dropped in January. That, I won't go into details unless you want me to later. It's basically a lot of paperwork. And we don't like paperwork. It doesn't solve problems. So we do the bare minimum to comply with this. This is on the town website. The plan, there's a link to it on my department website. It is 1,400 pages long because I have to. My actual plan is 15 pages long, but this new permit, they decided that every stitch of documentation that you ever create has to be appended to it. So it's 1,385 pages of attachments, including 100-page manuals and every street sweeping record I ever create, every inspection I ever do, all of that just becomes one of this giant document. And we're a small town. I can't imagine what this looks like for a larger town. But I do not see spending a lot of time on that document as beneficial. So we focus on elimination of outfalls. Outfall elimination serves the primary purpose of removing point source stormwater inputs, there's a definition I should have included earlier, from municipal infrastructure to local water bodies. And once all outfalls to a body of water are eliminated, that water body is removed from Speedies regulation. That reduces paperwork, allows us to focus our resources elsewhere. Next slide, please. So what's our methodology? We identify point sources of discharge to any infrastructure that's connected to it. Essentially, we start at the end, we work our way upstream. We find out everything that we've got. Doesn't need to be rehabilitated, doesn't need to be replaced, doesn't need to be enhanced. We'll model the stormwater sewer shed to determine the size and the type of contributing area. So for instance, is it a mostly open space or agriculture? Is a lot of it paved? How many of those areas have controls of their own? How much water is being contributed from it? And then we will install catch basins and leaching pools, or in other cases, if we can, divert it to an existing recharge basin to capture all that water as far upstream as possible, separate out the silt and sediment into the catch basins and filtrate the rest. And then finally, we'll either pull the pipe out of the ground, or if we can't, we seal it with concrete. Now you never have a problem there again. And statistics to date, we've identified 168 outfalls townwide, and we've eliminated 78 of them in a little over 5 years. The remaining, and that's 46% of total. Of the remaining, and these categories are based on that general permit. So the 22 that are fully regulated, those lie within the urbanized area. They're a higher level of regulation because of the purported density of that area. The other 41 are on the eastern side of the town, or Fisher's Island. Those are partially regulated, which means we really only have to do a few activities related to them. And non-regulated, that's a new category because there was a recent ruling at the Supreme Court level that water bodies that aren't navigable or commercial can't be regulated by the federal government under most situations. So this took out wetlands that are too small for you basically to put a boat in. So Marituka Pond would still be considered regulated, but a random freshwater wetlands that's off in the woods that we happen to discharge into is not. We still have them mapped because we still eliminate them. Whether they're regulated or not, we're cutting them as we work our way through the town. And We've completely eliminated outfalls to a number of local water bodies. We did Richmond Creek a few years ago. Downs Creek, I think, was this year. Multiple freshwater wetlands. Yes.
When you eliminate an outfall, cap it, pull it out, whatever you do, where is that water going?
Into the ground,
So, okay.
where it should have gone in the first place. You know, as you
What if when the ground is saturated, like after very heavy rains?
that's when you see water sitting on the road. Like I'm sure after this last 5-inch rainstorm that we had, some of you experienced that. The drains are generally designed to take rainfall from a 2-inch rainstorm. Anything above that we consider an act of God, that you're going to have a puddle in some areas for a little while. The standard is, does it eventually go away within a few hours? That's still successful. We couldn't possibly store and contain every drop of water townwide from every rainfall. Yes.
Where do boat ramps or there's different spots in the community where you see the road sort of goes down into one of the bays or creeks and stuff. Is that considered an outfall?
No. And that was something we had to fight hard to get the DEC to recognize, because there is nothing you can do there. You're at the water's edge. There's no place to put the water. So the most you can do is go as far upstream as you can and put in systems where you have some separation to groundwater. But as you get close to the water's edge, you know, when you put a structure in, that structure has a traffic bearing cover and then clean out cover or a grate, that puts it 2 feet below the ground. When you're at the water's edge, you dig 2 feet, you're already in water. I mean, I've seen this done. People have put in drainage in those areas and they're just basically underground swimming pools. It doesn't serve the purpose. Yes.
In those 27 non-regulated, is it possible that, could it happen that if it's a business or a homeowner and you want to do something about the outfall, they just say, sorry, don't, legally?
No.
Even
We
though they're
have,
not regulated?
so in most cases where our pipes go, we have, if they go over private property, we have formal easements that allow the maintenance of that property. The other one is, even if it predates having an easement, we have what's called a prescriptive easement. We have the right to maintain that infrastructure because it's been there serving that purpose for however long. So, and who would object to us cutting the pipe too? Like if you live on a wetland and we're dumping sediment into it and then we eliminate that, that only enhances it. I can't imagine
You
someone
could always
objecting.
find some.
I'm sure. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened yet.
And they
I haven't met that
Or
level of crazy yet. Is this the next one? Next steps, there we go. So, what are we focusing on next? We're in the middle of focusing on Mattatuck Creek, James Creek, Deep Hole Creek, and Goose. By the end of next year, those will be completely eliminated from the outfall map. And by the end of 2025, we anticipate having eliminated enough outfalls to qualify for a regulatory waiver from the general permit. I have no illusions that the DEC will give us one, but we will qualify for it. That'll be more paperwork. But that will free up valuable resources to eliminate yet more outfalls, and then just keep going till eventually we either cut them all or reach a point where the few that are remaining simply can't be eliminated. And additionally, any unknown outfalls that are discovered, this happens rarely, but it does because we haven't run a camera down every pipe that we own. Should we encounter a new one, that one is immediately scheduled for removal. So that we don't have a problem that's increasing in size, it's always decreasing. Yes.
What about the creeks that are not named on that list? Jockey Creek, for example.
We're working west to east right now. Because the way the regulations work, the areas that are purportedly urbanized are regulated at a higher level. So we're sweeping west to east, eliminating those, and then moving on to the ones that are further east. So Town and Jockey would be next on the list after we get rid of Goose. Yes.
And when you eliminate the outfall, it winds up in the groundwater.
Yes,
That's another problem, right, because the groundwater migrates into the bay, phase.
yes, but you're getting, at least with respect to sediment, you're removing the sediment completely out of it because that goes into a catch basin, which we then vacuum out. And anything that's in the water, like a pathogen, is going to theoretically die or be attenuated as it flows slowly through the water. Chemicals, it's nobody really knows like how much is in the water or where it's going. All I can say is it's better than mainlining it straight into the bay. Yes.
Isn't Mud Creek in between where you are on your two lists?
Yes, and we are working on that too. I have plans for that one, but it's a little more difficult because the ones that we have left in that area are so shallow. I'm still trying to figure out what to do with a couple of them.
The things that slow you down, the DEC and all that, are these just simply navigational, bureaucratic, or is it something that's also legal in terms of you had pro bono lawyers helping you, things would move faster?
I don't think suing them would move things faster.
Yeah.
Like we were the town that came up with the problems with the TMDLs. We figured that out within the first year that we started working on this, 2012, 2013. It wasn't until 5 years later when everyone else had decided that they'd also had enough, that we had enough momentum. When we were one voice, no one wanted to listen to us. When it was everybody on the East End all at once, suddenly they had to pay attention. And if it's any indication, when they said that they were going to come back and redo some of the TMDLs, our town was not one of the ones chosen. Anyone else? All right, so some of the resources that we have, this is what I had hoped to run you through today, but we would have all been very frustrated. The engineering department web pages have several pages of information that describe the program, have links to various state, federal, and town resources. You can get to our stormwater plan through there. You can get to our outfall map through there. In addition, our speedy sewer sheds map, which represents all of the remaining outfalls that are regulated. It does not show the freshwater ones, and that's because this map is a regulatory map that actually serves a purpose for our DEC regulatory program. So the other freshwater ones I have on an internal map. They're still going to be taken care of, but we don't represent them because I don't want the state conflating those with the ones that we actually have to address. And that shows a lot of information. It will show you the outfall, all the infrastructure connected to it, the sewer shed area that drains to it, land use, the status of the water bodies there, contours. It will give you everything that you could possibly need to understand what's going on in that area. And that's all I have. You have any other questions? Yes.
What for your annual program, what is the percentage of support that you get from the county, state, and federal governments?
Well, with regards to the actual regulatory program, zero. When it comes to outfall elimination, I get a lot of grants. So the Peconic Estuary Partnership has funded grants to eliminate outfalls. The state has given us a large amount of money to eliminate outfalls. The county in the past has given us money to do that. So it's primarily through grants that we seek to eliminate these from the program. But the regulatory part of it is all us. Yes?
What are your plans for Orient? Seems like we have a lot of direct outflow.
You have very few. We've removed most of them. Right now there are 1, 2, 3 left. 4, if you count the one on the sound. And they, 2 of them,
Where is the 3?
there's one right off of the main village area, near the pier. That's the largest one. That one would be very difficult to tackle because that road is concrete under the asphalt and it has gas on both sides, and I don't even know how to start on that one. There's a couple of others in Orient that are slated for elimination, and all the rest we've already gotten to.
There's one at Navy Street.
That's been handled. I plugged that one already. There may be a pipe in the beach, but it's plugged upstream. There's actually a problem with that area flooding that we've slated to put in additional infrastructure to address that. But all of the outfalls that we had along that street, other than the main one, have been plugged. Just because you see a pipe on the beach doesn't mean it's active. We don't always pull them because they run under private property. So then we just plug them with concrete upstream. Yes.
Can you explain what infiltration practices are?
Sure. It's basically taking a hole in the ground that's in communication with sand, and then directing the water into it. So when you see, if you're familiar with the cesspools from your home, like the big concrete rings, that's traditionally what we will do. We will put in a collection point, which is a solid bottom structure to collect all the sediment and silt, and then pipe it off to a set of rings that are set into the ground. And we just have to make sure they're set into a good sand layer so that water will then percolate down into the ground. Like some of the problems that we have in certain areas, especially along the North Shore, is the ground is full of silt or clay where the water will not infiltrate. And in those cases, you'll see us bringing in a crane. Sometimes we have to go down 40, 45 feet until we reach good material. Yeah, very slow, very expensive. Yes.
So I just wonder how much, it seems like we're dealing with a variety of issues out here in Southold, right? So you're focused on this really important question of mitigating stormwater, but then there are also lots of people worried about flooding. And how can we not have, floods when there's a full moon or after large rain and everything? And so I'm just wondering, is there also pressure from the town to be putting pipes in to just get rid of the rainwater? And is that something that is sort of in conflict with what you're doing?
No, there's no reason that we can't do both. And we are. I mean, I work very closely with Highway. Dan Goodwin's been an excellent partner on all of this. When we actually have it now, when he does a road, when he repaves a road, before we ever touch it, the first thing we do is address all of the drainage. Outfalls are eliminated, additional drainage is put in until it doesn't flood anymore. And again, flooding is a relative thing. So you get a heavy rainstorm and you see water on your, the road's flooding, that failed. It didn't. It's only designed to take a certain amount of rain. So as long as it's not filling up the road and damaging someone's property, as long as it's not sitting there for 24 hours after the rain is over, that's actually successful. I mean, some of these roads are so low-lying. You've got roads that maybe have a foot or two to groundwater. You'll get them fill, and the water will sit there for 8 hours, and people will call and go, "This isn't working." It is. You know why? It's high tide. What you're actually seeing there is the tide has come up so high that the water table is now at the level of the road, and it's not going to be till the next tide cycle that water goes away. So we're always working on this. When we do a project, I drive through that area for at least a year every time it rains to make sure that we got it right. If we don't, we come back and we do more. Yes.
Historically, when did this begin? Because it sounds like there's drainage pipes and drainage ditches that people put in, because to prevent flooding, presumably, and put it all into the bay with the estuaries, and then people realized that wasn't such a great idea. So, and now you're reversing something. When did it actually start?
Decades ago. The town has been working on this for decades. The town trustees and the previous town engineer had a long history of doing these types of projects, and what I've often told the state is that when the regulation started, everything else came to a screeching halt because it was so confusing. Nobody knew what to do, and it was this giant paperwork burden that the entire program reversed, and it went from being all about eliminating runoff to all about trying not to get sued by a state agency for not doing the right thing. And it was, and that's why at one point I had someone tell me, well, if we hadn't regulated you, you wouldn't be doing the right thing here. And I said, I invite you to come say that to our town trustees and town board in an open session while I stand outside with a bulletproof armor. So So really, the regulation of the towns and villages started in 2003. That was when that MPDES system, they started what's called Phase 2. Phase 1 was all of our cities in America. Phase 2 were these smaller areas that met urban or met these other definitions of having TMDLs or a few other criteria. So that was 2003. We got dragged in 2009 because that's when they finally got around to enforcing the TMDLs.
And do you have an idea of what percent of this problem with the water that we have is affected by the Supreme Court decision?
Yeah, it's 27 out of the remaining outfalls. That's because those are the ones that dropped out. The other, and again, remember, that's just a regulatory issue. That only, for me, that's only what I'm being forced to do as opposed to what we're actually doing. So those are still on my radar. We're still going to clip those as we move through those areas. They just, when it comes to, if those are in, if all things remain equal, if you have an outfall to a body of water that's not impaired, or an outfall to a freshwater wetlands that's not impaired, I'm going to take the body of water first. That's going to be a priority because it reduces paperwork. But they're both important to me. It's just a matter of how I prioritize them based on paperwork. Yes.
Can you talk about non-point source pollution and what can be done about that?
Well, from a regulatory standpoint, very little. I would say from a voluntary standpoint, people can do a lot. Don't overwater your lawn. You know, I drive through the town during rainstorms and I see all these irrigation systems going off. It drives me nuts. Don't put irrigation in the town right of way. People may not realize, but the road isn't just the asphalt. The typical right of way is 50 feet wide. Our typical road's about 24 feet wide, which means you've got 13 feet or more on either side that belongs to the town, and people will run their irrigation right up to the edge of the road. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been called out. Somebody go, your drainage has failed and my road's flooding. I get out there and they have a sprinkler head installed right next to it that's broken, that's discharging 24/7 into the basin. Don't mow your lawn as closely as you do. Leave it a little thicker. Don't use pesticides. Don't use fertilizer. Those are the things that you can do as an individual, but that conflicts with what a lot of people want to do with their property. So that's why that's not a regulatory area I want to get into, because then you're fighting with people over personal preference.
Well, the town is talking about regulating irrigation.
Yeah, they are, and that particular thing would be great because I don't think anybody can argue with that. You know, saying, hey, we need to have a sensor on there that you're not, irrigating when it's raining. You'd have to be insane to argue against that. I don't. It's a waste of a resource that we all realize is finite. The other things are all personal preference, but that's just common sense. Yes.
Mike, if I can go back to the outfall for a second, are you doing anything in Greenport, at what used to be Clark's Beach, where it's closed off now, where there was like sewage outfall from Greenport, I think?
If that's in the village, it's not us.
I don't think it's in the village. It's between, where is it located? Anybody else know what I'm talking about? Clark's Beach? No. Yes?
No.
No? Okay.
Oh, you're talking
North Road?
about in the Sound where their STP outfall goes in?
Yes.
So that is a regulatory closure. That shellfish enclosure is because the sewage treatment plant outfall is there.
Right.
Nothing can be done about that. That's an administrative closure that they're basically saying, hey, you could have an outage at the plant, and long before we ever found out about it, it might have contaminated the shellfish in the area. So that's just a precaution. There's actually no water quality issue there that I know of.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Again, I'm only going off what sampling I have from the state, but every time we've looked into that, there's not a closure related to water quality data in that area.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, you took care of the outfall into Goose Creek on Cedar Drive.
Yes.
Thank you. It's great.
Oh.
the outfall at the end of Pine Avenue was not included in your project because it was considered, it's not a town road, Pine is not a town road. That's one over.
Yeah,
Cedar.
if there's an outfall pipe there, then it's not one I'm familiar with.
It was, it's in the report, that report from 10, 15 years ago.
The one done by the Horsley Wickham Group?
Yes.
Yes, they have no idea what is private and what is public, so I don't use those at all. They don't know the area, they did not, everything that they put in there isn't really something we can use. They suggested I put an oil water separator at the end of the road. It's a residential area, who's changing their oil on the road? They didn't know the local circumstances, they're out of Massachusetts. So anything in their reports, I would take with a healthy dose of salt.
Okay, so if I wanted to research further, I could go on to the website information that you have there, or just.
I don't have private infrastructure marked on our maps at all. It's a regulatory map just for the town. As a matter of course, we don't display state, county, or private infrastructure on our maps because we don't want to misrepresent something. I have some of that information internally, but we don't provide it to others. Yes.
Hi. At the end of Indian Neck Road, there are two new large pipes.
Yes, we're familiar.
When are they, isn't that just going right into the bay?
No, they're probably spilling right onto the sand and then dissipating. Yeah, those were installed without my knowledge and they will be coming out.
Oh.
Yeah, that's part of a bigger problem. What was done there kind of ruined the whole road end and it needs to be reconstructed. So it's a bigger project. But those pipes were not necessary. They should never have been installed. I can't say for sure. I have suspicions. Yes.
Yeah, can you just tell me what you did at Downs Creek? You said you
Oh,
eliminated the outfall there?
yeah, that was an old, when the county redid the bridge, they put in a couple of collector boxes and a pipe that went out into the channel. And the pipe was set at the bottom of the collector box, so it had zero, effect. It just mainlined everything right into the water. We cemented off the pipe, filled in the boxes, and we now force the water to go through the planted areas to either side before it flows in. We would have put leaching pools in, but the water table's too high. So that's the best we can do. Yeah.
You mentioned road repair, and I'm looking for resources and references for permeable road repair for a private road. Where would I go for that? Do you have any recommendations?
I believe you can find some of that in the state stormwater design manual. There's a copy of that that's actually in one of the attachments to the plan, the town plan. That's one of those 1,400 pages of attachments. So the entire thing is there, or you can go to the state website to find that.
And does anyone locally do that?
I don't know. That practice is not, in general, it's not something we can use. That's what's known as a runoff reduction technique. It's really meant to be used in urban areas where you have huge areas that are paved over and you're trying to infiltrate where you can't use traditional drainage. So the only place we could use them here would be on areas that are very, very close to the water table, but they're not appropriate for a town road. Also, they would get plugged up very quickly. If you put them right next to a body of water, the first time you had a storm surge that deposited silt and sediment on top of it, it would be rendered inoperable.
So what's the solution to meeting a permeable road? Repairing a road that has like always flooding.
I'd have to know your specific circumstance. It's not an easy answer, but in general, there are a number of different permeable options that you could look at. It's just not something that we use municipally.
Okay, so, and I look on the website for these?
You can find examples of it, I believe, in the stormwater design manual, but there's a couple of, I know there are products, like there's a product called Grass Pave that can be used, which is, you put in a drainage layer or reinforcement layer, and then you put grass over the top, so your only maintenance is cutting it. There's a number of different things that you can use, we just don't use them.
Right, just looking for references.
Yeah, there is, so I think one place I know that something like that was installed is, I think it was the Highway Emergency Access Road for, what's it called? It's called Harvest Point now, the condo complex in Cutchogue. I'm pretty sure they use that. It's not an in-use road. It's an emergency access road only, and I think they did that in a permeable paver.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
In a case like what Mary's talking about, we have a lot of private roads in Southold town. If an HOA or a community wants to improve their private road because of a great amount of runoff or a lot of flooding or something like that, can the town help them out and make recommendations to them about how to handle the problem, or they're kind of really on their own?
Yeah, we're not set up to give professional advice to HOAs and the rest. Like in this type of forum, I can point you to resources, but when it comes to specific design considerations for your individual roads, no, we can't. Yes.
Is there things that people can do who live on, I'm on a private road, but other people who are on the main roads, is there individual homeowners things that they can do to help prevent what you're talking about?
Yes, install and maintain driveway drains, and then my earlier comments about irrigation, that really helps us out. When you go into a neighborhood and 90% of the driveways are just shedding their water directly into the road, it's very disheartening. We're already trying to deal with the water that we generate, and we have to deal with everyone else's. Same thing with your roofs. If your roof isn't going into a dry well, that would be helpful. Yes.
I think we're all very pleased with what you're telling us in terms of improving things. Do you have a way of measuring improvement out in the water bodies and the bays and on the sound as a result of these years of, trying to eliminate the wrong products going into the water?
I wish that we did. The main problem I have is we used to have a cooperative arrangement with DEC where we were going out and taking shellfish water quality samples for them and getting them to their lab. And pre-pandemic, we got to the point where they just said, we don't have the capacity to take your samples anymore. And to go back to my earlier point of how these regulations are based on flawed data, if you look at almost every water body that has a shellfishing restriction in Southold town is undersampled. They don't meet their basic minimum statistical sampling requirement. Now they've told me that they have the right to do what they're doing. I don't believe that they do, but they don't answer me. And they've made that quite clear. So unfortunately, short of that, there's very little we can do. At one point, Maricopa Lake this gives you an idea of the circular reasoning. Maricopa Lake has been declared impaired for pathogens for decades. When I put in a FOIA request for all of their data, I discovered that it was impaired for pathogens and for metals. And when I got their raw data, I said to them, look, the metals concentrations you're reporting, we should shut the lake down and start mining. So they went back and looked at it and they're like, oh, we made a mistake. That's not real data. So they took those, that was de-designated for metals, so now it's still for pathogens. And I said, for pathogens, you have no sampling data whatsoever. And they said, well, somebody saw some birds on the lake. I said, great, I saw birds on my front lawn, should I declare it impaired? But they basically said, we don't have data to support it, but we can't remove it without data. I said, well, you're going to get that data. They're like, no, we're not. And then they came out with a new document that said, if we made an error, you can have it removed because it was an error. And I pointed that out to them and they said, you don't have data to prove that we made an error. I said, you don't have data at all. And that's been going on for 10 years. And so finally, we actually went out and we got approved to do sampling in the lake to figure this out for them. And we got what's called the Quality Assurance Project Plan, which is a very, very detailed document that says how you collect, transport, and test the data, these samples. And then I came back and said, okay, we're ready to go. Now I need a sampling plan. I need you to let me know how many samples you need in how many locations for what length of time. And they said, go back and look at our document. I said, I did. It doesn't say any of those things. It just has laboratory information. I'm like, well, we're not giving you any more information. So what am I supposed to do? Go burn tens of thousands of dollars of the town's time and money to come up with information that may not be used? So that will remain impaired for pathogens forever because they refuse to do their job. And so that's why I can't go sample for them. I have to get information in a format that they will use. Anything else, they'll just tell me is junk and they won't use it.
I think we feel your pain.
Yes.
But that may be an example of where you need to take it, you personally, the town, to a legal level and say, we can't do our jobs because you're being obstructed in one form or the other. I would think, I'm not a lawyer.
So I've been in court in a DEC case where we were told that, no one has ever challenged us on this and won before. We helped support a private company in their fight. We won the court case and lost the war. They will just stall you with other tactics until you give up. I do not find it to be a productive use of the town's time. It's not worth fighting. This is the best way we can fight them, is just getting out of the regulation completely and going back to doing our jobs. Yes?
Yeah, looking forward a little bit, can you share with us any information on the work that you and the highway department are doing on the flood map, with regard to sea level rise and future effects?
That'll come out by the end of the year. We're in the final round of revisions on that. So,
can you share with us a little bit about what purpose that map will serve or what its intent is?
well, it serves two purposes. One, it's going to be a guideline for highway to determine when we improve a road, whether or not it needs to get raised. So there are certain areas that I know that Dan's planning to repave that are on the map, and now we know you can't repave it at the level it's at. You're going to be accommodating the problem rather than solving it. So that's one thing. And then eventually what we hope to do is to feed this information back into the emergency management plan so that in the event of a catastrophic hurricane or some other storm, our emergency evacuation routes don't go through a flood zone, or at least avoid them to the greatest extent possible.
Do you have time for one more question?
I have as much time as you need. I've walked out the whole day.
It is 11, and Michael's been up here for an hour helping us understand this problem. So how about one more question, and then if people want to stick around?
Sure.
Your call.
How about, has this issue been raised with legislative representatives from our area?
We've raised it with everybody. It's an intractable problem. We were the first people that got the different arms of the DEC to talk to each other. This whole problem occurred because you had, so for instance, the impaired waters issue. So this one I showed you with West Harbor. So that was one unit. The unit that did that did the TMDL regulations looked at the shellfish enclosures, never talked to the impaired waters unit, right? Then manipulated the data in a way to create a problem, which then was sent to the stormwater unit to be included in a stormwater regulation, which then came down to our level. And it's like you're dealing with all these departments who never talk to each other for any reason. The shellfish unit operates on its own. The impaired waters unit and the shellfish unit don't talk to each other. So we created a map that showed which ones were water quality related closures and which ones weren't. Because the shellfishing unit doesn't care. It just tells you, you can't shellfish there. They're like, how other departments use our data is not our problem. Well, it kind of is, but I guess it kind of isn't. So there's someone at the higher level of the agency would have to consider this a problem and make everyone talk to each other. Well, we made them do that. They didn't. And once we got what we wanted, I'm sure everything went back to business as usual. Yes.
Last one.
Seems like, a lot of the shelter closures are nitrogen related to algal blooms, which is not really a stormwater thing, it's from septic. But my question is not about that. My question is, you mentioned drains, trench drains for at the ends of driveways. Is that in the code?
Technically, under chapter 236, which is the town stormwater code, when you build or renovate a house with impervious surfaces, so if you're doing a new driveway or putting a new roof on, anything that requires a permit, technically that should get upgraded as well. New homes, it should be done as a matter of course.
Thank you so much.